one other thing that happened is Fox commentator Judge Janine, she said the Pope is the one that ought to lead out in solving the problem of the war in the Middle East.
Tonight, Christians in the Middle East marked for death because of
drawn from 2014, but there has been newer, updated material since then, but the Amazing Facts hasn't made a video about it yet. But I just thought, you know what, let's just kind of give an idea. Let's project it out there, kind of give an idea of how busy the Vatican's been, how busy Pope Francis has been over the last couple of years. And if you've been watching the news and you've been reading the papers, and you know exactly what they've been doing and what's going on. And first off, I have to say, you know, it said Pope Francis believes in the Big Bang Theory. Did you hear that on there? You know, I believe in the Big Bang Theory too. God said it and bang, it happened. I believe in it too. I'm just playing. I had to throw that one in there. I saw that on a shirt. I was in a I think it was a Christian bookstore, and my brother bought the shirt. It said, because there's a popular show out there today called The Big Bang Theory. I don't know if you've heard of it or seen it, but my brother had bought this shirt. It has this Big Bang Theory logo on there, and it says Big Bang Theory, and then on the back it says, I believe in the Big Bang Theory. God said it, and bang, it happened. So I like that too. Also, you'll notice in there, some people might have questions as to why Pastor Doug addressed this speaking in tongues issue. He addressed and said it almost seems like the Catholic Church is endorsing this new charismatic movement of speaking in tongues. Well, for those of you who don't know, I'm just going to make an announcement now that this coming Friday will be our last regular meeting of this series before next Sabbath morning. And so this coming Friday, I'm going to be giving my testimony on where God has led me from, and how I grew up in the Pentecostal faith and grew up in the Pentecostal church, and how God led me away from that. And I'm going to also be doing a study on the gift of speaking in tongues. That is going to be Friday night, so you'll need to come to that. It's going to be very exciting, and I think you're going to learn a lot from it. Also, for just the next few minutes, I want to just discuss the United States' role in Bible prophecy. Do we find in the Bible, that the Bible addresses the United States as a nation? Do we find the word or the phrase United States of America in the Bible? Okay, so many people might ask, well, how do you come to those conclusions? Well, we know that when you go to Revelation chapter 13, and you can turn with me there if you would like, just for a couple of seconds. We're going to look at a couple of details. Revelation chapter 13, and if you've studied Revelation chapter 13, or you've ever read Revelation chapter 13, then you know there are two different beasts in this chapter. What is a beast in Bible prophecy? We know that it's a significant kingdom or world power, world dominant power. And so we find two beasts in Revelation chapter 13. Now I put this picture up here on the screen because this is an artist rendition or an artist depiction of the first beast of Revelation chapter 13. And when you go through here and you read the description given about this first beast of Revelation 13. For instance, there in verse 3, and I saw one of his heads as it was wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after this beast, wondered after this kingdom, this nation. And they worshiped the dragon which gave power to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast, who is able to make war with him? And there was given to him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. We figured out what that was according to the Bible. And power was given to him to continue 40 and 2 months. That's 42 months. And we learned that in the Bible, 42 months prophetically is a period of 1,260 years. Who is this beast that we're talking about, this first beast? Who ruled for a period of 1,260 years in the Bible, in history? We know that it was none other than the Roman Papal Church state. And we know there's plenty of context clues that are given to us here. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given to him to make war with the saints. Did the papacy make war with the saints? Yes, they did, if you read your history. And to overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him whose names are not written in the Lamb's book of life, slain from the foundation of the world. And then it goes on to say, if any man have an ear, let him hear. He that leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He that kills with the sword must be killed with a sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. Did the papacy kill with the sword? Did they lead people into captivity? Okay, were there people of the papacy that was killed with a sword? And were they led into captivity? Yes, they were. We find this in history. It confirms it very, very clearly. So we know that this first major beast of Revelation 13 is none other than the Roman papal church state. Now, when you keep reading here, you come to verse 11. And verse 11 is going to describe this significantly different beast, but a rather powerful beast indeed. And we know that a beast represents what? A kingdom. So we know this is a rather powerful kingdom. And so what we see is something very interesting. If you read this in its proper context, you'll find that this beast was given a deadly wound. And that eventually the first beast of Revelation was given a deadly wound. So the papacy is given a deadly wound. And what year did the papacy was it given a deadly wound? We know that it was shut down momentarily in 1798 AD when Napoleon Bonaparte sent General Berthier in to abolish the papal government. They took the Pope captive and took him over into prison where he would die. Okay? And for many years, the papacy was not as significantly powerful as they had previously been. They did not have that world dominant power. In fact, their independent statehood was stripped from them until it was returned to them in 1929. That was given to them by the Italian president Mussolini. Okay, now what's interesting is if you read this in its proper context, you'll find that as this first beast, this papal system, as it's going down and it's been given this deadly wound, this second beast is rising up out of the earth. And this is very significant. The first beast comes up out of the sea. And in Bible prophecy, what does the sea represent? Peoples, multitudes, nations, different tongues, different groups of people. A large, densely populated area. And we get this from Revelation chapter 17, verse 15, where it says that this whore, this great harlot that we studied last night, which is also this papal system, it said she was riding a beast that rose up out of the sea. And it says that this sea, the waters that she sits on, is peoples, multitudes, languages, and a mass-populated group of people. This first beast rises up out of the sea, but as this deadly wound is given to the first beast and it's going down, you see this other kingdom, this other beast rising up out of, not the sea, but the earth. And this is what the Scripture says here according to Revelation 13 and 11. He says, "Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb." This is very interesting. "Two horns like a lamb, and spoke like a dragon." Now, I've read this for many years, and I don't understand why God gave him this vision and why he described seeing this as a lamb-like beast with two horns. I've never seen a lamb with horns. But what does a horn represent in Bible prophecy? A horn represents a significant world-dominant power, or a very, very powerful system. And most of the time, over in Daniel it says it represents a kingdom, a nation. But we know in the original, it just overall signifies that it represents a significant dominant power of source, okay? A world-dominant power, okay? That's why when you see those 10 horns on the beast over in Daniel 12, and you see these 10 horns on the first beast of Revelation 13, we're talking about 10 significant dominant powers within this one system, okay? Now I want you to notice something here about this. This second beast that we're looking and reading about here, notice this is the only verse in all the Bible where you're going to find a lamb and a dragon mentioned in the same verse. Every other time in the Bible, well, more specifically, every other time in Revelation that you read about this lamb or read about a lamb, it's almost in every single situation, it's describing Jesus Christ as the Lamb of God. 26 times in the book of Revelation, the lamb is mentioned. A lamb is mentioned. Only one time is the lamb mentioned in reference to a beast or a kingdom. But in the original, you'll find that this word here, arnion, is describing a lamb, a baby lamb. The same lamb that is described over in Revelation 5, where it's talking about Jesus Christ appearing before the throne of God as the lamb that was slain before the foundation of the earth. Very interesting. But also it goes on to describe how this kingdom, this nation, would go on to speak like a dragon. So, very interesting enough, it's almost as if when we read in the context clues of this passage, we're reading as if this nation, this kingdom, has traits or was built upon principles of a lamb. Christian principles. Was the United States of America built on Christian principles? Was we established in the beginning what most people would call today as a Christian nation? And you find that these two horns on this lamb represent two significant powers. If you go back and you study the two significant dominant principles and powers that this particular nation, the United States, was established on, you'll find that it was the separation of church and state. Okay? Two significant dominant principles and powers within the nation. This is what we were built off of. This was the foundation of our Constitution, the foundation of the independence that we staked our religion on. Okay? But notice how it begins, it's almost as if it begins, it's rising up, he sees two horns like a lamb, so there's something lamb-like about this particular nation. But then he turns right around and describes how this nation speaks as a dragon. How does a nation speak? Through its legislation, right? If you really want to determine the character and the nature of this particular nation, just look at its legislative laws. Now, in the beginning, the United States of America, and by the way, there's no doubt that this particular nation is this particular kingdom, this beast is the United States of America. Because think about it. As the first beast is going down in 1798, there's another beast coming up. And notice that this beast is a world-dominant power, a world-dominant nation. Only one dominant nation was coming up in power around 1798. The United States of America. Okay? And notice how it says it came up out of the earth. Was the United States, did it begun and was it established in an area, in a geographical location that was densely populated by a mass group of people? No. What you find is that this nation was begun, even though there were native individuals and tribes and different things that was established here, it wasn't a very densely or mass group of populated area. This nation was begun by people from across the seas, and this nation began to rise up on its own by the establishment of many different groups of people that actually migrated. It wasn't already established by a mass group of people, which is why you find the difference between rising up out of the sea and this beast rising up out of the earth. If the waters represent a densely mass-populated group of people, then the rising up out of the earth would obviously represent a sparsely populated area. Okay? So there's no doubt that this is the United States of America. But I have to ask the question, if a kingdom speaks through its legislative laws, then that must mean that as John saw that there was something lamb-like about this particular beast, this particular nation, in its beginnings, in its start, but yet it would eventually begin to speak as a dragon. Has the United States always been the same, or have we seen some changes lately? Are our laws and our principles as a nation, are they the same as what we began with more than 200 years ago? We don't find that. Absolutely not. You see, we were a people in the beginning. This nation was begun and had begun on Christian principles. We were considered a Christian nation, even though we weren't perfect, and even though many of our founders were probably not perfect, and many of them probably not as Christian as they should have been. In our documents, in our Constitution, in our governmental foundation, we found the ideal principles of Christianity there that began this great nation. But now you look at the America today. Are we the same America today as we were yesterday? Are we speaking more like a dragon? Is our laws beginning to reflect not the character of Christ, but the character of another spirit? We find that very, very clear. And I want you to notice in that video that we watched, do we see kind of an alliance that looks clear between the Vatican and the United States? Do we see a lot of American influence and a lot of Vatican influence on America, and also America coming to the Vatican? Do we see kind of an alliance built there? And I'll have some people who'll tell me, Ryan, I just don't see it. I just don't see how America and then the Catholic Church and the Vatican are really, I don't see this relationship. Well, you know what? It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out, because if you've paid attention over the past few years, you will find that we have been very, very active in a very active relationship with the Vatican. For instance, this is 4 of the last 5 living presidents that we've had, and here they are in direct connection, going to the Vatican, or the Pope coming to the U.S., and these are special visits that have occurred between the president, the leader of our country, and the leader of the Catholic Church. Even when Pope John Paul II died, at his funeral, you have almost all of the living presidents and their families present there, and they're there kneeling before this dead corpse as if a significant figure that they had a relationship with had died. Very interesting. In fact, if you go back and look at the history, think about it, let's consider the Cold War. That long-lasting Cold War between Russia and the rest of the world, but more specifically Russia, the Soviet Union, and the United States. Do you know who was given the credit for bringing an end to the Cold War? The longest war, the war of all wars, they said, that everyone wanted to come to an end, all of this communism mess and all the war, the nuclear threats and all this mess. Who did they say was credited for that? Well, if you read Time magazine, February 24th, 1992, they called it the Holy Alliance. And if you know your history, you know that they credited none other than Pope John Paul II and his special relationship and alliance with none other than Ronald Reagan himself, the President of the United States at that time. Does the United States have a deep Catholic influence? Or does the Catholic have a deep influence on the United States? Do we see a relationship that is occurring that perhaps many years ago wasn't so? And by the way, if you know your history, you know that when our nation began, it was because there were many, many individuals who were fleeing Western Europe because of the persecution of the Catholic Church. If you read your United States history, you'll find that the United States of America was established as a Christian nation, but a free Christian nation, because these individuals had been persecuted by the Catholic Church. They were fleeing Western Europe to get away from them, to begin a free Protestant country. And by the way, if you read your history very clearly, you'll know that even up to the 1950s and 60s, from the 1950s and 60s and before, if you were a Catholic in this nation, you were persecuted. But things have changed since the 1960s, ever since we elected our first Catholic president, John F. Kennedy. In fact, I remember years ago, even as a kid, there really wasn't any such thing as having Catholic governmental officials. Even though it began in the 1960s, it was slow to warm up. People still didn't like this idea of having Catholic governmental officials in our government, leading our government. But things have changed in the past decade, in the past couple of decades. In fact, most people don't realize this, but our Supreme Court, that was previously made up of 9 Supreme Court justices. I don't know if they've named a new one yet, have they? I don't think they have yet. I think that's coming soon. I think Barack Obama intends to do that before he leaves office. But you'll find that 9 of these former previous, and I say former previous, 8 of them are still in there. But obviously I think it's Mr. Scalia here. He just recently passed. And but you'll find that 7. No, it is 6. That's right. 6 of the 9 Supreme Court justices that we had on this particular panel were all Catholic. The other 3 were Jewish. There's no Protestants that sit on our Supreme Court justice. And you say, whoop-de-doo. No, not whoop-de-doo. Because guess what? When the president can't make the decision, and the Congress can't make the decision, and they can't get along, guess who the final word is in this country on major laws and governmental legislation? The Supreme Court. So the real strength and the real power in this nation comes down to the determination of these 9 Supreme Court justices. And I don't know if you realize this, but there's a reason why they have 9. It's an odd number. Because they always will get a majority vote no matter what. And notice who the majority is on this particular panel. 6 Catholics. Okay? Very interesting. Even the former Speaker of the House and former Minority Speaker of the House, Boehner and Nancy Pelosi, are Catholic. Now, I'm not sure about Mr. Ryan. He probably is Catholic too. If I put my money on it, I could almost bet he's probably Catholic. See, there's a much more stronger influence of this system coming into our country because they're building an alliance because something's coming, my friends. We know that they also invited Pope Francis to come and address a joint session of Congress in 2015. And it did happen. For the first time in history, our governmental agency, the most powerful political agency in the world, the U.S. Congress, invites Pope Francis to come address them. Why? I thought we were supposed to, as we were built in this nation, supposed to keep the separation of church and state. Let the government be the government, let the church be the church, right? Because what happens when you bring them together? Go back and study the Dark Ages. What happens when we allow the church to make governmental decisions or the government to make church decisions? Bad things happen. Millions of people died. This is the visit between Barack Obama and Pope Francis when Barack Obama went to the Vatican. Now, what in the world is he going to the Vatican for? Having a private meeting with the Pope. Something's going on. And even our religious leaders today, this is Kenneth Copeland and James and Betty Robeson and Carol and John, or James are not, I think that's what it is. These people are going, these are Protestants, and they're flanking themselves to the Vatican. They're going to the Vatican, and they're having these private meetings with the Pope. And by the way, just to clarify this even more, do you know what happened yesterday? Have anyone read their paper? What happened just yesterday? Now see, it would technically be considered today because this event happened overseas over in the Vatican. And technically our yesterday was their Saturday as well. But according to our time, guess what happened yesterday in the Vatican? Let me read it to you here. Bernie Sanders. You know who Bernie Sanders is? One of the Democratic candidates for the presidential race. Bernie Sanders met with Pope Francis in the Vatican. Now I want you to notice the language used. This comes straight from the New York Times if you want to see this. I just found this morning, or I would have had it in my presentation here. Notice this. Senator Bernie Sanders, the Democratic presidential candidate, met briefly with Pope Francis at the Vatican on Saturday morning before the pontiff's trip to Greece, the senator said, and this is his words, "I convey to him my great admiration for the extraordinary work that he is doing all over the world in demanding that morality be part of our economy." Okay? Mr. Sanders said during the flight back to New York from Rome, "We have got to move toward a moral economy, not simply an economy based on greed," he added, which, you could read this, anybody could read this article and go, "Oh, that's so wonderful. We do need more of a moral economy. We don't need all the greed." And praise the Lord for that. We certainly don't need those things. But what you find here is you find the governmental officials. He's a senator. I think he's a senator of Vermont. This is a senator of the United States who is a part of the Congress, and this Congress official is, and by the way, he's running for president. He's trying to run for president. This official is saying, look, we need to go back to what Pope Francis is trying to do. He's trying to lead us into this more moral governmental economy. We need to take the government, and what they're basically saying is we need to take the government and we need to take moral Christian values and we need to bring them together. And all of us would agree that, yes, we need a little bit more Jesus in the government, right? But again, when the government starts making moral decisions for the church or the